everyone, it's Emily, and today I'm here to bring you another Mystery History Talk. So this year, the Mystery History Talks have a theme, which I did not really think about when I picked out my books for the year. Last week, I told you about Grace Humiston, a detective who owned her own detective agency in New York City and was active between 1905 and 1930. This week, I'll be talking about Maud West, a detective who owned her own detective agency in London and was active between 1909 and 1939. Maud West is rather an enigma, as the author of this talk's source material, Susannah Stapleton, discovered. Stapleton's book, The Adventures of Maud West, Lady Detective, Secrets and Lies in the Golden Age of Crime, is part social history and part Stapleton's search for who Maud really was. The reason Maud first attracts Stapleton's attention is because Maud was a master promoter. Maud had a casebook that she wrote her cases up in. Some of these cases are reproduced in the book exactly as Maud wrote them. Maud also used this casebook to write up the stories for newspapers and tabloids, and when she did, she made herself look very good. Because she promotes herself as London's only female detective, although Stapleton shows that this isn't true by highlighting other women detectives who were working in London at the same time, her stories are picked up and spread to newspapers around the world. She was also a big fan of doing interviews with whoever asked her to. In these articles, she is often referred to as the woman Sherlock Holmes, another similarity with Grace Humiston, who was referred to as Mrs. Sherlock Holmes in her newspaper appearances. This propensity of Maud's for publicity also makes it hard to pin down the truth of her life. There are many times when she told the same story, but details changed in each telling. She also tells different stories about her upbringing, how she got into the business, and her methods of detection. Stapleton does quite a bit of research trying to determine Maud's background. Maud always claimed in her writings and interviews to be from a family of lawyers, one of whom gave her her first opportunity to assist with the case by getting her hired at a hotel as a maid where a murder had taken place. However, Stapleton finds evidence that Maud was actually the daughter of a servant and that she even was illegitimate. Maud West was a fake name. Maud's legal name was Edith Elliot. Given her tendency to elaborate on her cases and puff herself up in the newspapers, it's no surprise at all that Maud would give herself a better past. Maud was also married and had 7 children, making it amazing that she had any type of career at all, much less such a productive one. One of her daughters, Maud West Jr., as she was referred to in the newspapers, ended up working at her mother's firm for a time. Stapleton actually ends up contacting Maud's grandchildren and learning a lot about Maud's family and life after retirement. Once Maud quit being a detective in 1939, she basically disappeared from records. It turned out that her family knew very little about her detective work, and Stapleton actually showed them historical items and photos that they had never seen before. As I mentioned earlier, Maud was not the only woman detective working at the time. Stapleton discusses how women first became involved in detective work in the early 1900s with the development of store detectives. These detectives blended in at large department stores that were specifically there to stop theft and shoplifting. After the divorce laws were relaxed in Britain and you no longer needed an act of parliament to get a divorce, women detectives began assisting with divorce cases as adultery still had to be proved. It was much easier to catch an adulterous wife with the assistance of a female detective. Stapleton also talks about Kate Eason, a rival of Maud's who was working as a detective at the same time. The two had offices pretty near each other and frequently were linked. Kate got her start as an actress and then turned to detective work as she got older. Stapleton actually theorizes that Maud followed a similar path and might have even been Kate's apprentice before striking out on her own. Being a good detective required the ability to disguise oneself well and to blend in any scene, both skills that would have been acquired while treading the boards. Stapleton dedicates several chapters of the book to discussing the average task of a private detective, noting that most of their time was focused on affairs, blackmail cases, and insurance fraud. Maud was quick to say throughout her interviews that though the detective life appeared glamorous, much of it was simply observation and waiting. There's a discussion about disguising and the methods detectives used to conceal themselves, and a brief mention of the disguise craze in the early 1900s, where people, including Virginia Woolf, would go to great lengths to disguise themselves to their friends. Despite Maud's tabloid antics, she was a successful detective. One of the first pieces of evidence Stapleton finds about Maud in the newspapers was that she was going to be reminiscing about her career at the Exhibition of Women's Progress that was held in London in 1936. Maud was also at one point the chair of the Efficiency Club, which was an early organization for women in business. During Maud's tenure as chair, Dorothy L. Sayers came and spoke to the club about efficiency in murder, where she discussed the person she considered the most efficient murderer ever, George Smith, a man who killed people by strangling them in the bath. Due to their state of relaxation, Smith was able to kill all of his victims without a struggle. In some ways, the book really is about the exhibition of women's progress. Obviously, Maud is the main focus, but because so much is unknown about her, Stapleton also widens her subject. Maud's involvement with the Efficiency Club leads to a larger discussion of women's desire to be included in the traditional realms of business after World War I. This caused a great culture clash between those more traditional beliefs of motherhood being a woman's prime job and those wanting more say in the running of society. In addition, the suffrage movement is spoken about at length, particularly because Kate Easton was known to be involved in it, and also partially because Stapleton thought at one point that Maud was the daughter of a lawyer who had defended one of the suffragettes who had gone on a hunger strike. Maud also claimed to have discovered that certain members of the royal family were giving money to the WSPU at a time when the government was prosecuting people for doing so, although Stapleton isn't sure this is accurate information. In fact, despite Maud's made-up upper-class background and her frequent references to upper-class figures in her newspaper writings, Stapleton finds that in a lot of ways, Maud was really trying to attract middle-class business. Certainly, Maud worked in upper-class households. Gambling and petty theft were common high society crimes that would sometimes require detective assistance, but these things would have been kept under wraps and dealt with social ostracization, not with press attention. The fact that Maud wrote so many articles and was always interested in promoting herself indicates her interest in more than high society work. She was particularly interested in attracting military attention during World War I and published ads in multiple armed services publications at the time, promoting her firm's ability to keep watch on unfaithful wives in particular. She also had a small filler item about her firm included in Vanity Fair in 1909, and then used Vanity Fair's endorsement in her middle-class ad publications. Maud West was a fascinating woman who took control of her own narrative to create the life and job that she really wanted. In some ways, she appears to be a woman that had it all. Stapleton spends the entire book finding out who Maud is, but of course there are still mysteries, things that Maud deliberately took to her grave. Her life story is fascinating and in some ways indicative of the society in which she lived, where so many things were changing for women and for the world. Maud died at the age of 83 in 1964, living by the sea. She had a long and full life with both excitement and tragedy. She left behind her notes for posterity, but she left them on her own terms. Thank you for joining me for my Mystery History Talks this year. I always say I'm going to do more of them throughout the year, but I never get to it. They always take more time than I expect. So I'll probably be back with the next one for March Mystery Madness 2022. I hope you have had a wonderful March Mystery Madness so far, and I'll be back next week with my wrap-up for the month. Bye!